What is going on, everybody? Welcome into the next episode of my off-season deep dive series. Today, we reveal my 29th ranked Tennessee Titans, a team that is certainly turning a new leaf in terms of what this team is going to look like, going from the smash mouth, old school Mike Vrabel to young quarterback, offensive-minded head coach. Very excited to dive into this team and talk about what this season and beyond could hold for them. Before we do get started, though, if you enjoyed this deep dive or have been following along with the series, if you could do me a huge favor, please take just a second to hit that like button. It's a free and easy little thing that really does support my channel. This is all I've got time for over the summer. So it's really important to me that these videos do well, and that like button really does go a long way. I really appreciate it. And of course, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of these deep dives as we lead up to the #1 team in my power rankings. But as always, let's get started by recapping this team's offseason that was a busy one. They weren't exactly quiet for a team that is in transition. They spent a lot of money in free agency. And of course, completely turning over the coaching staff as well, which is where we're going to start here. And while I'm optimistic and have plenty of good things to say about the Brian Callahan hire, I can't with certainty say that it is an upgraded. Mike Vrabel was a fringe top 10 head coach, in my opinion, that has had this Titans team overachieving in many departments in his tenure in Tennessee. So we will see if the overall coaching will be improved. But like I mentioned, it is complete turnover. Vrabel out. Offensive coordinator Tim Kelly out. Defensive coordinator Shane Bowen out. He's taking over for the New York Giants. And even down to the special teams with Craig Aukerman moving on from the special teams coordinator as well. But the additions, Brian Callahan, the former offensive coordinator for the Cincinnati Bengals, we'll have lots to talk about with him when we get to the offensive coaching segment of the video. But he's going to be reunited with Nick Holtz, who is coming over from Jacksonville from most recently. And then his dad, Bill Callahan, probably the biggest acquisition on this coaching staff in terms of what's hard to get. Not that there's nothing special about Brian Callahan, but guys like him do come around. But the opportunity to take his dad, who is one of the 2 or 3 most well-respected offensive line coaches in the league, which is a critical position in the organization, to be able to steal him from the Browns to come coach with his son is a huge, huge deal, and maybe the biggest nod towards this being a potential upgrade with the coaching staff. And then with the defensive coordinator, Denard Wilson, getting his opportunity as a defensive coordinator coming over from Baltimore, and then Colt Anderson, who was most recently in Cincinnati, is going to be stepping up as the special teams coordinator. So a lot of staff movement. In terms of the quarterback, again, that will be to be determined. They're obviously hoping this will be upgraded with Will Levis and his development. But on paper, obviously, Ryan Tannehill out the building has done a very good job as the starting quarterback for this team. Didn't have a great opportunity to really succeed last year, but he is out the door, still available if they wanted to bring him back, but that's obviously not in the plans. And then they bring in Mason Rudolph as a backup to compete with Malik Willis. But again, they're hoping this will be an upgrade. The #1 priority for this team season is to ensure that Will Levis is a good starting quarterback. But that's, again, to be determined. And then with the running backs, how could this not be downgraded? King Henry saying his goodbyes in Tennessee. They bring in Tony Pollard, but no way to get around that. That is a downgrade in the run game. And then with the tight end room, very little to say. Trayvon Wesco out the door, Nick Van Att in, a pair of tight end 3s on the move. Wide receiver, however, massively upgraded. All they're losing is Chris Moore, who played over half their team's snaps last year. The wide receiver room was shaky at best for them last year, but they bring in Calvin Ridley, the highest paid free agent on the market this year. Tyler Boyd as well follows Callahan over from Cincinnati. And then they even spent a 6th-round pick on Jaquan Jackson out of Tulane. So obvious upgrades with the wide receiver room. And then the offensive line as well should be an upgrade. They do say goodbye to Aaron Brewer, who missed all but 1 snap last season. I'm not sure if that was a kneel down or what. Maybe his helmet came off for a play, but they will say goodbye to the undersized Aaron Brewer, who heads to Miami. But Andre Dillard, the signing at left tackle, did not work out. Chris Hubbard, who had to step in because the signing at left tackle did not work out. Those guys are out the door. And then they obviously spend that 7th overall pick on J.C. Latham. Plenty to talk about there. It was not my favorite pick in the first round, to say the least, but should still be better than what they got at left tackle last year. And then they did upgrade at center, getting Lloyd Cushenberry, the top center on the market, over from Denver, and then they add some depth in Sadiq Charles. So critical positions there. O-line, wide receiver upgraded. Obviously, like I said, the priority here is making sure Levis has everything he needs to show you what he can do this year. But then defensively, some ups, some downs in terms of the roster movement. They did invest on the interior of the defensive line. Tyre Tite was let go mid-season last year, only played 30% of their snaps. Kyle Pecco was a rotational player for them, but they spend that top 40 pick on Tavondre Sweat, the behemoth nose tackle out of Texas, and then they signed Sebastian Joseph Day as well. But should be upgrades on the interior of the defensive line, especially considering Tyre Tart just didn't play much for them last year. On the edge, though, it is downgraded. They lose Danico Autry, who definitely was able to generate some pressure for that front. And all they really did there, or were able to do, was bring in Jalen Harrell, 7th-round pick out of Michigan. Linebacker as well, downgraded Azeez Al-Shaair, who had a big year, kind of took a prove-it deal to play with Mike Vrabel, and got a nice contract with Houston after what he did last year. In terms of replacing that, they bring in Kenneth Murray, who's really struggled as a first-round pick for the Chargers. Cedric Gray was a 4th-round pick that I liked, but not going to be better than Azeez Al-Shaair in year one, most likely. And then kind of a developmental converted safety in James Williams. So should be looking at some questionable linebacker play this year, as we'll see later. But in the secondary, that's where they did choose to really spend their money. Saying goodbye to a couple of starters from last year, Sean Murphy-Bunting and Christian Fulton, but making the big splash to go get L'Jarius Sneed, give him that big contract to be their number one corner. They even brought in Chidobe Awuzie, continuing that Cincinnati pipeline down to Tennessee. And then they spent a 5th-round pick on Jarvis Brownlee, so a definite new-look cornerback room that should be upgraded. And then in the safety, not much to speak of. They let Kayvon Wallace walk. So a relatively busy offseason for the Titans, definitely a team in transition. They want to stay competitive, but obviously had a lot of holes on this roster that weren't all going to get fixed overnight. But I think it was a very good offseason for them, especially with some of the free agent signings that they were able to secure. But let's take a look at this new-look coaching staff, very new-look coaching staff, as we just saw. And while they have big shoes to fill with Mike Vrabel, who, as I mentioned, has done a very good job with this Titans team, didn't necessarily do a good job with the offense of this Titans team, and they're making that shift towards the offensive-minded, ascending, younger head coach in Brian Callahan. And there's plenty of reasons to be optimistic about Brian Callahan. He has earned a lot of credit for kind of what has transpired with that Cincinnati Bengals offense over the last couple of years. You know, honestly, the Zach Taylor regime, from a kind of offensive play calling viewpoint, got off to a rocky start. Even in 2021, when they went to the Super Bowl, there was still a lot of questions about the inconsistency with the offense, some of the play calling, the predictability. Zach Taylor, being a Shanahan, McVay disciple type, just couldn't quite get that system going. And then they fast forward into 2022, coming off that Super Bowl appearance, and the first 5 weeks of that season, it was more of the same, and the offense was really struggling. But they had one of the more memorable kind of in-season turnarounds that I can remember, in terms of basically just rewriting the playbook overnight. And I think it was a week 6 game in New Orleans when the Bengals basically took the under center, play action oriented McVay style offense, threw it away, and went almost entirely shotgun. And really the reason the Bengals were able to make that switch in the middle of the season like that is almost directly Brian Callahan's presence in that building. Zach Taylor is a younger coach that hasn't had that full breadth of understanding all of the different offenses out there. He's mostly been in that McVay tree, right? Well, Callahan was in the building, who's kind of ran it all. Yeah, he's done some of the wide zone stuff under Taylor, under Kubiak in 2015, but was with John Gruden and Greg Olson in 2018. Very much a kind of modern pro-style offense that was going on at that point in time with the Raiders offense and Derek Carr. But even going back to Mike McCoy in the early 2010s, one of the kind of earlier sort of spread offense implementers in the NFL, and Adam Gase as well, working with Peyton Manning in 2013, 2014 in Denver. And those influences really showed up with Joe Burrow and, just kind of going shotgun, spreading things out, 2x2 formations, and shifting from what was an under center, wide zone, play action oriented early down offense to a north and south, running the ball out of shotgun, inside zone, pin and pull type of system. And the Bengals really haven't looked back since they made that change. And they've kind of publicly, between Burrow and Zach Taylor, kind of given Brian Callahan that credit. So, it's a big deal what he accomplished in Cincinnati. And that should give you plenty of optimism that this is going to be a good hire for the Titans. Now, in this series, we're not giving any one team a specific benefit of the doubt. These incoming head coaches, yes, there will be guys that rank higher than others, but I just can't rank Brian Callahan too high before he kind of shows what he can do, ripped away from Joe Burrow and Zach Taylor and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and all that, right? But a very solid baseline for the offensive coaching here, where I give them a B- ranking, which is top 20, right around that territory, with a C+ ranking for run game coaching, where I do think their run game improved when they went to more of that shotgun style stuff. And then with the overall coaching culture, obviously just a ton of turnover, a ton of work to do, even if there are still some good existing groundwork pieces that were laid by Mike Vrabel, who was a great culture coach. But beyond ranking Brian Callahan here for the Titans and talking a little bit more about what this team is going to look like schematically, while we talked about the kind of transition to a shotgun, more spread forward offense in Cincinnati, that's not guaranteed to be what this Titans offense looks like. In fact, there is actually a massive melting pot of different influences here that actually makes this one of the more interesting teams to monitor heading into the year, to kind of see what this offense ends up looking like on film. Because, of course, you have the shotgun influences from Callahan, but Callahan himself has some wide zone background, having come in, worked with Zach Taylor and Gary Kubiak in 2015. But you have his dad, Bill Callahan, who's not listed on the graphic here, but I mean, he's coming from Stefanski's very much under center, a combination of, wide zone, counter, pin and pull, a very diverse under center run game that really weaponizes their guards on the move in a very fun way. He's going to have his voice in that room in terms of especially the run game, what they want to call and all that stuff. So you'll get those influences. And then Nick Holtz as well is going to be the offensive coordinator. And he's coming from working with Doug Peterson last year, who has some of that Andy Reid spread influence as well, which could add some different wrinkles to some of the stuff Brian Callahan ran in terms of being a shotgun forward offense and run game. So there's a lot of different voices in terms of putting this playbook together. And then you have, of course, trying to figure out something Brian Callahan has talked about, like figuring out what's good for the quarterback and running the plays that are good for him and not necessarily just running your stuff. What is Will Levis good at? And what does he want to run as the young quarterback here? So we know what these guys have run in the past, but I'm very excited to see, schematically speaking, what the Titans want to do this year. And I think they are kind of a open book in terms of how they want to design this thing. And I think that's exciting. So it's going to be a much larger influence from the offensive coaching staff than what Titans fans have gotten used to over the last couple of years, really since kind of Arthur Smith left. And then you look at the defensive side of the ball, and it's also kind of a rookie defensive coordinator here, someone that's going to have to prove himself, someone I can't rank too high, and another guy that was surrounded by Mike McDonald and has always been under kind of a premium defensive coach. As you look at his resume there, Jonathan Gannon, Todd Bowles, Jeff Fisher, Greg Williams, these are some big names he's worked for. And it's great to see that he's got those influences, but also this is his first crack at, kind of being the guy as opposed to being the guy under the guy or the guy under the guy under the guy, which has been mostly his career. So he's got a lot to prove in terms of being a defensive coordinator, but it's definitely a fun hire. I mean, the league at large, as a starting point here, is trying to replicate what happened in Baltimore over the last couple of years with Coach Mike Macdonald, a brilliantly modernized defensive scheme that has given the league a lot of trouble. It's a system that Ted Wynn of The Athletic actually just wrote a great article about that I would recommend checking out. And Ted talks about TED Talk. Go watch Ted Wynn's TED Talk about Mike Macdonald's defense. Anyway, the article is all about how it's the terminology has been kind of modernized in a way that young players can really grasp, and it allows them to play fast, but it also allows them to kind of vary up their blitz looks and make adjustments on the fly without being overly complicated. And that terminology should translate throughout the league, right? So if Denard Wilson's going to take that, even if he was only in the building for a year, if he understands that well enough and does some of those similar principles, that should be pretty damn effective around the league. And that's why Miami hired a guy, the Chargers hired a guy, the Seahawks hired a guy, the Ravens promoted a guy. Like, the league is trying to replicate the Ravens defense. They've made that very clear. And I can only imagine that is Denard Wilson's plan, even though he has all of these other influences as well. He was also just recently under Jonathan Gannon with the Eagles, someone that I've actually gained a lot of respect for. Jonathan Gannon's ability to design blitzes and, create phantom pressure and scheme guys open rush looks, getting unblocked. So some of the X's and O's stuff that might have carried over there. Todd Bowles has been brilliant at that for years. He worked with him for 2 years with the Jets. And then Jeff Fisher and Greg Williams, very blitz-forward teams. So with Denard Wilson's background, you do expect this defense, at least stylistically, to feel relatively similar to Mike Vrabel's approach to defense, which is kind of that attacking 3-4 front sort of. But it's going to be definitely different schematically, both in terms of the lingo that we talked about, but also the coverages on the back end. Probably not quite as much man coverage here, though they do have some good corners to go man that they didn't necessarily have in Baltimore over the last couple of years. So we'll see what that kind of looks like. But Baltimore has been a very kind of cover 6 and zone heavy team overall, with really on the back end having a lot of those sort of Fangio / Nick Saban-esque influences, with Mike Macdonald coming from the college ranks, where pretty much every defense in college is run in Sabanese, if you will. So Mike Macdonald has not just, redesigned the front and made things easier, because he's had to coach college kids, right? With all the turnover and the youth, you have to, simplify your lingo for those kids if you want to run a pro-style defense. But he's also taken those influences from all of the pattern matching zones on the back end that has infiltrated college football. So it's a really exciting scheme. And now the question is, can Denard Wilson run it after being under Mike Macdonald for just a year? It's kind of a tall order, but very excited for him as well to get this opportunity. He's been under some great defenses and great defensive coaches, and I think very easily deserves this opportunity to show us what he can do. So it's a new look coaching staff that can't necessarily rank too high, but they're all exciting hires that have everything in front of them to prove that this can be a very high-end coaching staff. But with that said, it is time to turn our attention to this roster, where we're going to rank every position group, how they stack up against the rest of the league. And that's going to start with the passing game here and the quarterback room that is going to rank 28th as we head into the new year. But really the primary objective for this Titans team, there's other things, right? But the main thing that matters for the Titans this year is walking out of this year feeling like Will Levis is your franchise quarterback and feeling much better about him than being the 28th ranked quarterback. And ultimately, especially for those that have followed my draft content and what I've said about the Titans for the better part of a year now, is I believe in Will Levis. I think he's a hyper-talented young quarterback. If you stack him up against that sort of run of first-round players that, first-round quarterbacks that we just recently saw, Michael Penix, Bo Nix, J.J. McCarthy, all these teams rushing to the table to spend top 12 picks on those guys. I mean, you go back a year, Will Levis was a better quarterback prospect than all three of those guys, in my opinion. Hell, I had a higher grade on Will Levis than I did on Jaden Daniels. We'll see how that ages, right? But that just kind of shows you at least where I'm coming from in terms of the fact that I thought he was a legit, top 10 caliber quarterback prospect. I think I was consistently in my mock drafts putting him to the Colts at 4 and the Raiders at 7. Like, I can't really explain why he fell out of the first round in the way that he did and fell all the way out of the first round. And the Titans stopped that run very quickly, trading back up to get him at the top of the second. But I do think when Will Levis took the field last year, he very quickly showed teams like, hey, you probably shouldn't have passed on me. Yeah, he's got his flaws, but the talent is undeniable. The first thing that you notice about him is the unbelievable arm talent, the velocity on his fastball. When he throws these deep balls, it just keeps on carrying down the field, where even guys that I consider to have strong arms, when they're pushing the ball 55 yards down the field, eventually it kind of dies off. Will Levis, it's like the frickin' bazooka X Factor trait in Madden, where you get the extra 10 yards of distance on your arm. He's got that activated at all times. Like, he has an absolute cannon. It's probably in the top 5 of arm strength in the NFL. And he has that paired with a lightning quick, dare I say, Aaron Rodgers-esque flick of the wrist release technique, where in the face of pressure or right at the snap, he can get that ball and just, throwing a 15-yard out or a speed out or, a bubble screen. It's like a handoff for Will Levis, assuming he throws it accurately. But the speed in which he can get the ball down the field is really impressive and a truly rare trait for Will Levis. There's only a handful of quarterbacks that can put the ball in a spot from the opposite hash with the speed that Will Levis can do it. It's rare. Not to mention, he's got the size. He's a good athlete. He can create plays with his feet and with his arm. The upside is really quite high with Will Levis, and I don't think anybody's going to sit here and deny the physical traits on him and why he was well worth the risk for the Titans to, spend so much, a second-round pick for a quarterback with these talents. So I really do believe in Will Levis and that he will shatter this 28th ranking. Now, he's got a lot to prove, right? And I know it sounds lazy, but the big thing that Will Levis has to improve is just his consistency. And I know it's kind of a cop-out way to put this, but I think there's two things with his game that lead to some inconsistencies. Number one is the processing and decision-making. I think, we talked about the physical traits. He's not a dummy. Like, he can read defenses. He can get from 1 to 2. He's got polished technique, in my opinion. He can run an NFL offense and make all those reads that you ask of these guys. It's just a matter of doing it more consistently. And I would say his processing and decision-making was average for a rookie. And for Levis, it's, as a starting point, it's like, can we make that average for an NFL quarterback, not just for a rookie? While you'll see him make good reads, you do see him turn down some open throws that should be in his field of vision. You do see him force some decisions, putting the ball in harm's way in a way that you don't necessarily want. So it's just a matter of, learning the new playbook, continuing to be that gym rat, put in the time to get to the field prepared and make the right reads and decisions more consistently. And that isn't so much a concern, for a young quarterback. You expect those things to improve, especially with a better offensive staff and a better surrounding cast here, where last year he didn't have a whole lot of places to go with the football outside of, at times, just forcing the ball to DeAndre Hopkins. The offensive line didn't give him a lot of time to make good decisions. And you go back to his last year at Kentucky as well, it was a really bad surrounding cast. So you're hoping those things will help. But if you're worried about one aspect of his consistency that might not get better, for me, that would actually be consistency in the sense of accuracy. And I always say, accuracy does not mean the ability to throw accurate footballs, because Will Levis throws some unbelievable dimes, right? As do most NFL quarterbacks. throw accurate footballs. But accuracy is all about consistency. And with Levis, there's a little bit of that kind of little league pitcher in him where, it's the 13-year-old kid that can throw an 80-mile-an-hour fastball somehow, but doesn't have great command and is putting a runner on base every inning. There's a little bit of that with Levis where he's got this rocket arm and he has this crazy quick release, but it's kind of this uncontained energy exploding out of his arm at times. And you'll see overthrows and underthrows that are uncatchable, but even beyond that, it's some of the sort of like what we would chart at PFF as a inaccurate catchable ball, where it's, you're still giving the wide receiver a chance, but it's, he's running a crossing route and he's got to turn around and make a tough catch, and you're not giving him those good rack opportunities. Or it's a jump ball where the receiver had to really adjust to make a tough catch. Or you're throwing a flare route and the running back has to overextend and one-hand it. It's a lot of that with Will Levis, where he can hit the door frame, but he can't always hit the doorknob or the keyhole. And I think you can question his overall control of the football. And I also think there's a lot of times where he needs to learn to throw the ball with touch a little bit more, to kind of float it over those linebackers instead of, you'll see him like really rocket arm it on a straight line, and it's like there's not an angle to get that ball in there. So there's areas that can improve, but there's areas that I'm like, is that ever going to improve? So that'll be something to watch with Will Levis. And then I know this has been a pretty optimistic review of Will Levis, but there is something that does bother me about his game, and it bothered me at Kentucky as well, and it's his pocket presence, or at least his pocket feel. And that's where you get to the sort of difference between what's pocket presence versus what is pocket feel. This is a little bit of a tangent here, but it really matters for a guy like Will Levis, where I think his pocket feel in the face of the rush is really poor. He has a pocket presence. He will stand tall in the pocket, knowing he's going to get hit, throw the ball down the field from the pocket. And even at times when the rush gets in quickly or a guy loses in a hurry, he can see it and react and do something about it, whether it's getting rid of the ball or getting in a scramble drill. But what you see missing with Will Levis is that natural feel for that space inside the pocket as the rush naturally gets to the quarterback and the pocket naturally breaks down. He doesn't have that sort of supernatural feel for that space between the tackles where he can navigate to the open space inside the pocket and buy time inside the pocket for higher percentage throws. And that can come from, again, either buying time for a guy to get open, or you feel out the rush and end up extending the play, breaking out of the pocket in play extension. And in terms of extending plays for Will Levis, similar to the accuracy conversation, he will do it. It's just he doesn't do it consistently enough. And instead of buying that time for higher percentage looks, whether it's scrambling for a first down or finding an open wide receiver, what Will Levis will do, and a lot of quarterbacks that lack this sort of natural pocket feel, is, when the pressure gets in, they'll either take a sack or get hit while throwing, where Will Levis was way at the top of the league in terms of getting hit while thrown, which is a real metric that can show you where these problems show up. But he's either, taking contact that he doesn't need to take, leading to sacks, leading to inaccurate throws while he's hit, or he's kind of going to just get rid of the ball under pressure, where he's going to, put the ball up for the wide receiver to make a tough catch. We saw a lot of that with DeAndre Hopkins last year, or he'll throw that back shoulder, or he'll take the check down, or he'll throw the ball short of the sticks on third down. And those are, those can work, but you're basically taking the ball out of the quarterback's hand, ironically, by taking the ball out of the quarterback's hand. But you know what I'm saying? Like, you are putting the pressure on others to make the plays instead of the quarterback to make the plays. And that's where you start to talk about quarterbacks kind of getting capped in terms of their upside. And that's been a frustration for me with someone like Dak Prescott or Justin Herbert, that I think has held those guys back from kind of climbing up into that top tier. And I think for now, that's not a huge concern. With Will Levis, you're more like, okay, can the processing improve? Can he just show that he's a good quarterback like a Dak Prescott? And you'll be happy with that. But if he ever wants to take that giant leap and be a true difference maker, that might be a trait down the road that just never comes along and is actually a bit of a limiting factor for a guy that does have theoretical crazy upside with the arm talent. I think we spend so much time talking about athleticism and arm strength in terms of upside when there's other stuff in terms of the mental side and the pocket presence that can hold guys back as well. And I do see some of that with Will Levis, but it's still an optimistic outlook for him. I think he can become a top 15 quarterback in the league, something like a stronger armed Kirk Cousins, maybe even all the way up to like a Justin Herbert, but that's getting way ahead of ourselves here. Let's just see what year 2 can look like for Will Levis. And if you're walking out of this year and saying, hey, he's the 17th best quarterback in the league with a improved surrounding cast around him here, you're going to be pretty damn happy about that if you're a Titans fan, I think. But for now, they rank 28th, and I think that's fair. He had a very up and down rookie season, crazy flashes, but flashes of not so great as well, which was to be expected for a guy getting thrown into a really tough situation with the O-line and the playmakers last year. In terms of the backups, you got Mason Rudolph, who's a very unexciting, generic NFL backup who played well for Pittsburgh down the stretch last year. And then you have Malik Willis, and while he really hasn't done anything here, and they've obviously already kind of given up on the idea that he could be the long-term starter for them, I did say with him coming out, like his lack of processing and ability to run an NFL offense was going to set him against the 8-ball. And I said it was a 2-year development trajectory for Malik Willis to really even be ready to see the field. So this is now after 2 years, heading into year 3. If he can just learn how to run an NFL offense, make his checks, just correctly make a first read, look at a safety and understand what the coverage is, he could be a good backup in the league. He throws a nice football and he's an incredible runner of the football. So, maybe this could be the year that happens. But again, this year's all about Will Levis and him showing growth. But let's talk about the much improved weaponry here that should be really in a spot where it can allow Will Levis to tell you and show you what he is. I think for a 24-year-old year 2 quarterback here, at least from a weapons perspective, this is certainly a kind of let's just put it this way, an excuse-proof cast. Unlike last year where it was DeAndre Hopkins and really nobody else, if Levis is struggling immensely here with this group of weapons that I rank kind of in the top half of the league, ranking 14th to 18th with a solid B grade. But, if Levis struggles, he's a guy you spent a second-round pick on. You're going to keep him in there all year, and you're probably going to be picking pretty high in the draft and maybe looking at a quarterback next year. So it gives you an excuse-proof cast, but it also, in a positive light, should be a group here that can help Will Levis develop and succeed and become, the flip side of that and be the franchise quarterback here. So it starts with DeAndre Hopkins, who to me is still a number 1. It was funny when he signed here last year. Everyone's like, oh, here we go. It's Andre Johnson and Julio Jones signing with the Titans, washed up again. And I'm like, no, it's not. You guys just didn't watch DeAndre Hopkins in Arizona the year before. He's still really freaking good. I mean, has he lost maybe 0.2 of a step and isn't a great separator at this stage in his career? Is he the top 5 premium elite talent that he once was? No, but separation was never a huge part of DeAndre Hopkins' game anyway, and he's still that receiver where you give him a chance to catch the ball, and he's maybe as good of a contested catch target as anybody in the league still. And he's so smart in terms of the nuances of the position, whether that's sitting down in his zone or boxing out a cornerback or using a subtle push-off when he needs to, angling himself on a jump ball to put himself in the best position to win a catch, or working with the quarterback in scramble drill, where that's been an elite trait of his with Deshaun Watson and Kyler Murray, and even flashes of it with Levis, where when the quarterback breaks in the scramble drill, he has this kind of supernatural feel to find the open space in the defense. There's so much to like with DeAndre Hopkins, and honestly, he was really good last year. I think so good that I'm a little surprised that he hasn't kind of asked for a contract extension, where he took, I can't say a discount because he had some injuries and some suspensions that decreased his market. But I do think for DeAndre, I mean, he has every right to want some more money heading into a contract year here. It was a 2-year deal he took in Tennessee, but maybe he just wants to see what Will Levis can be. And open up the opportunity to go play with a great quarterback if it's not Will Levis. I don't know. But this is really about what they added around him, and that is primarily here with Calvin Ridley. And Ridley now gets to go from really over the last 3-ish years, he's been trying to prove that he's a number one wide receiver, and he's just not. I mean, he wasn't in Jacksonville. He obviously dealt with the suspension stuff in Atlanta, but then the year before that, Julio Jones had just come here to Tennessee. They thought Ridley could be their number one, and he just wasn't able to take that leap. And there's two things with Calvin Ridley that I think at this point have shown us that that's not who he is. Number one, his ball skills just aren't good enough. He's kind of a frustrating drop or not getting that second foot down or not winning that contested catch. He's just kind of a frustrating play waiting to happen in that sense. And then he's missing a little bit on the mental side, whether it's, being in the right place at the right time, slowing down his route to sit down in his zone, working with the quarterback and scramble drill, all the things that DeAndre Hopkins is so good at that help him still be a number one. Ridley's just missing some of that. So in terms of being a number one, where he's consistently the number one read, he's consistently drawing the opponent's number one corner, has to work with the quarterback on timing routes, be a back shoulder threat on the sideline, be a trust throw guy in a contested catch situation. That's being a number one wide receiver, is being available for the quarterback in all those ways. Ridley very clearly is not that, but as a number two, where a lot of those more challenging tasks of the position are going DeAndre Hopkins' way, and a lot of times the number one corner is going to be on DeAndre Hopkins, Ridley as a two is fantastic. And even if he has some of those issues, he's still probably one of the 5 best separators in the league that we have. He's got great speed and, dare I say, elite route running technique, the way he can set guys up and his foot speed, the way he can snap off a route. It's truly fantastic. So he settles in a great spot. And, I was a little concerned with Ridley hitting the market again or returning to Jacksonville that he was going to be asked to be a number one receiver again. But he landed somewhere that, as we just broke down, is like perfect for him. So it was one of my favorite signings of the offseason, honestly, which was a bit of a surprise considering I'd really kind of soured on him in Jacksonville. But it's a huge upgrade from Chris Moore and Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, who were their wide receiver twos last year. So that's a big deal, but maybe not so much with the Tyler Boyd signing. He's much more of a name at this point, and this signing happened. It was kind of like, yeah, okay, that's fine. I get it. He's with the new, system being implemented here with Callahan coming over. He's an excellent leader. He's going to be kind of that on the field coach. That's really where my positivity on Tyler Boyd stops. I have seen him slowing down. He just doesn't create a lot of separation. His ball skills haven't been as great. Even his run blocking has taken a dip. He just isn't that sort of best number 3 wide receiver in the league that he once was. He's still a useful player. And I will say, DeAndre Hopkins and Calvin Ridley, they aren't exactly known for their leadership or practice behavior or being great mentors in the building. Both these guys have kind of had some stuff going on off the field. I mean, DeAndre Hopkins is kind of known for basically skipping practice, getting Tyler Boyd in there to work with some of these younger guys like Treylon Burks and Jaquan Jackson and being kind of a stabilizing force in the locker room does make sense. So there's non X's and O's reasons why Boyd makes sense. But in terms of is he that big of an upgrade over Nick Westbrook-Ikhine as a wide receiver 3? It's pretty marginal, but he does raise the floor of that wide receiver 3 group. But the nice thing is he doesn't need to get a ton of volume here either. So it was a fine signing, but certainly not someone I'm touching in fantasy football at all or anything like that. And then Nick Westbrook-Ikhine goes from having to kind of be this team's number 2 B wide receiver last year. He goes to being a wide receiver 4, and I think pretty much every team in the league would love to have Nick Westbrook-Ikhine as a wide receiver 4. Not necessarily in the sense of if someone goes down, he can step up and be a good starter for us, but more in the sense of as that 4th wide receiver that is going to have to be a part of the rotation and play 15 snaps a game, he's someone that just has a lot of useful traits about him. He's not the most explosive guy. Not going to, create a ton of separation or anything like that, but he blocks his ass off. He seems to be like a really clutch player for whatever that's worth. He seems to always be that guy that has made the big contested catch on third down or made a guy miss to get a big first down to seal the game, or, again, as a run blocker, like be that guy that can take on a linebacker and open up a first down run for Derrick Henry. He's just a super smart, tough football player. That's a really nice wide receiver to have. And then all of a sudden with these signings, their depth is getting pretty interesting. Treylon Burks, who was the first round pick that they were hoping was going to be the A.J. Brown replacement as the 18th pick in the draft or whatever he is, he's now kind of an afterthought and has been put into sort of a shit or get off the pot type of season here. Now, he's had his ups and downs, to say the least, on and off the field. He's on the field shown verticality, the ability to win tough catches, those physical traits that he has. He's flashed some greatness, but he's had some frustrating drops, and kind of a lack of route running and development has all been put into question. And then he's also had injuries and was a guy that kind of after he got drafted, there was a lot of questions about, does he care? Is he out of shape? He just, kind of wants to sit in the woods and hunt wild boars.
We need to just log in and stay in the forest, killing boars.
Was overweight for his rookie camp, all that stuff. And it's hard to say that stuff hasn't somewhat come to fruition on him. But I'm also not entirely done believing in Treylon Burks. He was certainly more of a raw player coming out at a very kind of one-trick pony type of usage at Arkansas. And it hasn't exactly been the most fruitful offense for him to thrive as a young wide receiver. So, coming in a situation where he has to compete for playing time, he's got a mentor in Tyler Boyd, who's actually somewhat similar in size, kind of that bigger slot type. If he can just watch Tyler Boyd and follow his work habits and do what he does, he could be a really promising young wide receiver still, but anything you get from him this year is house money, and they've put themselves in a situation where they don't have to count on him. And then you have Kyle Phillips, another guy that just hasn't been able to stay healthy. That follows him back to UCLA, but he's shown that he is a really good slot wide receiver, honestly, and very minimal looks when he's gotten those opportunities. I would even go as far as saying he might be better than Tyler Boyd if he's healthy, and in the weeks that he's healthy, if he makes this team, I would just play him over Tyler Boyd because I think he's a better route runner and separates better. But he's not guaranteed to make this team because of his injury track record. They draft Jaquan Jackson, who is another kind of slot type, in the 6th round. I liked him. He's talented. He's a good route runner, looked good at the Senior Bowl. And then everybody else is probably just competing for practice squad spots at that point. Colton Dowell would maybe be the other guy to keep an eye on there. Was a 7th round pick out of Tennessee Martin with rare traits, but obviously just very unproven. But it's a really good group of wide receivers. One of the oldest wide receiver trios in the league, but still one of the better ones. The tight end room is much more questionable. Chig Okonkwo, I can't quit Chig, even though last year was really disappointing. His rookie season was really exciting. Myself and many people were really high on him, and he came out the gate and looked really good. But in Tennessee's sorry excuse for an offense last year, Chig didn't exactly thrive. He did come back on in the second half of the season with Will Levis, so that's, to me, why the arrow is still pointing up and why you can believe in him. But frustrating drops and just kind of usage questions held him back. But to me, the tape is still good, and as long as he can clean up the drops, he is a really hyper-athletic tight end that can be a separation problem. And a useful blocker as well, coming across formation. They can line him up as a fullback, do some different fun stuff. And this is a system that can flex that tight end out wide and doesn't necessarily rely on that tight end to be a nasty inline blocker, which isn't necessarily Chig's strong suit, though he can hold up and hold his own in that way. So I like him. He just has to prove a lot. And then Josh Wiley showed some stuff, very limited looks. I think he had maybe 14 targets last year, but was super efficient. I thought he moved really well for such a big guy on tape for Tennessee last year. I didn't necessarily see that in Cincinnati, so it's possible he's working on his route running and all that. But he's someone to keep an eye on as more of the bigger bodied tight end here. If it's more of a rotation with Chig, it wouldn't be a huge surprise. And then they bring in Nick Van Nett to fill out that room. Whatever. He's bounced around the league. He's a tight end 3. And then a bunch of, kind of practice squad types. But then it's also one of the better groups in the league in terms of receiving backs. They signed Tony Pollard, and we're going to talk more about these guys as runners in just a second. But both these guys are highly capable receiving backs. I actually think Tyjae Spears is even better. I think he's just, even though Tony Pollard was the guy that played wide receiver in, at Memphis, I think there's part of it is like there's a reason he switched to running back. He doesn't always have the most easy hands or run the best routes. Yes, he played some wide receiver going back to his college days, but it doesn't always show up, but it does. He's been a productive receiving back. There's no way around it. He's a good athlete out in space. But Tyjae Spears is really smooth, man. He runs great routes. He doesn't lose any momentum transitioning to a runner after catch. He's really instinctive to kind of know where guys are coming from to make that first guy miss. A lot of Aaron Jones on Tyjae Spears tape coming out of Tulane. And then again, as a rookie, he got just as many snaps as Derrick Henry last year as a rookie. He was damn good. And I don't really see this as a, Pollard's the third down back or Spears is the third down back type of situation. As I'll talk about in a second, I think this is more of a true rotation. It could be as simple as first drive is Tony's, second drive's Tyjae's, third drive's Tony's, fourth drive is Tyjae's. A true 50-50 split here. But both guys are highly capable, kind of similarly styled backs as well, that are going to be a little bit more than just dump-offs and screen threats. Both these guys can shake linebackers and line up as wide receivers and do some stuff in a lot of the spread formations and empty formations that we should see here. So they contribute. They really do. Beyond that, with the running backs, Haskins and Chestnut are kind of bigger, unproven backs. Dylan Johnson as well, rookie out of Washington, nice undrafted pickup, smooth hands, good pass protector, not a great athlete. Probably not going to see a lot of him, but I do think he'll be around here, if not on the 53-man roster on the practice squad, and could be a reliable backup if Pollard or Spears go down. But again, it's a very good group of weapons. Some unproven elements in terms of wide receiver 3 with Tyler Boyd trending down and Chigo Okonkwo, kind of how consistent can he be? And overall, there's just a lot of great groups of weapons in the NFL, which is why the Titans aren't top 10. But I think that's probably the biggest strength of this football team. And as we kind of broke down, it's a well-distributed group of skill sets that, in theory, should allow Will Levis to reach his upside. But let's revisit those running backs and transition a little bit more to the run game here. I mentioned this is going to be, in my opinion, a true 50-50 split. You have your sort of thunder and lightning backfields, and then you have some backfields where it's it's just kind of nice to have two guys that are pretty much the same, that you don't have to worry about who's on the field and when. It's more about, this is your drive, that's your drive, and then if one of these guys rips off a 25-yard run and needs a breather, the other guy's just standing on the sideline waiting for you to tap him on the ass, tell him to get in the game. It's a nice, easy way to coach the offense here, and both these guys are really good backs. Pollard did have a bit of a disappointing year last year. I think proved that he's not a premium, true number one back. Maybe just a little something missing in terms of power and vision and, true shiftiness. It's hard to really put your finger on what's missing with Tony Pollard, but there is a little bit of that lack of consistency that maybe shouldn't be there for a guy that fast. Who he reminds me a ton of is those that remember Tevin Coleman, who could never break through as that true number one, but a ton of juice and really good as a part of a rotation. A lot of that in Tony Pollard, kind of a similar speed train run style as well. But Tyjae Spears, a bit unproven, and obviously had to share the workload with Derrick Henry last year, but I was a huge believer in him coming out, and I really think you just got to keep coming back to those Aaron Jones comps. He's like the same size, very similar athlete, great vision, better on, inside the tackles type of stuff than you would expect. And I think that's where he might even be better than Tony Pollard. Maybe not quite the long speed of Tony Pollard, but in terms of setting up blocks and having some of that patience when he needs it, but the ability to kind of anticipate a hole and hit it hard. before a D tackle or a linebacker can get to you. He's got great instincts in that way. And honestly, the Pollard signing, the more I've kind of let this breathe and let my frustrations as a Tyjae Spears fantasy owner wash away, because this was an opportunity for Spears to be a true number one back, and they're taking that away from him by bringing in Tony Pollard. But a main thing that happened with Tyjae Spears after the draft was all these reports that, like, his knee is going to give up on him. Like, he is basically going to play out his rookie contract and be done. Well, if there are concerns about longevity or even durability with that knee, reducing his workload is the best thing that this Titans team could do, and putting it in a situation where, again, you have two like-minded, like-bodied backs that you can just do everything with and not really have to worry about it. It's a nice room, man. Neither of these guys are elite talents, and we'll see kind of what Tyjae Spears' ceiling ultimately is. It's probably not incredibly high just because he is a little bit on the smaller side, but these guys are going to be legit contributors to the run game, just as they were in the receiving game. Now, from a fantasy football angle, I wouldn't touch these guys with a 10-foot pole in any sort of dynasty or redraft situation. It's just, to me, it's going to be a true 50-50 split. We don't know how great this run game is going to be. It's going to be a week-by-week situation, which is why if this is a best ball type of league that you're in, or if you're signing up using promo code TFG on Underdog Fantasy, I don't mind getting both these guys, because both these guys can have explosive runs, and in best ball, they'll, just whoever has the better week will be in your starting lineup. They'll set your lineup retroactively. I don't mind it for that, where you don't have to make a decision on these guys, because there will be weeks here where Pollard has a great week and weeks there where it's a Spears week. So definitely a best ball running back room I'm fascinated in, but not any sort of other format. In terms of the depth, you're not really hoping to see a ton of these guys, though I will say, Haskins missed last year. They have a little bit more size in really all these other guys, whether it's Haskins or Chestnut or Johnson. It should be a true competition for the RB3 job. Mentioned Johnson was a good pickup out of Washington, not someone I saw with starting upside, but certainly someone that should make an NFL team. And Chestnut had some fun moments in the preseason last year, and an elite name as well, working in his favor. Whoever takes the RB3 job could get in the mix as another fantasy football frustration, as that kind of classic goal line vulture, because that was what Haskins was at Michigan. Any of these guys could come in on a, third and goal and steal that touchdown. In terms of the quarterback run multiplier, we don't expect that to be a huge part of this offense. Callahan himself doesn't really have a ton of experience tapping into the quarterback run game, which is a big part of this. But Levis is more of a, mix in a read option here or there. You could even go like QB power to pick up a 3rd and 1. But he's not like a dynamic rushing threat. I think even at times his sort of speed and athletic juice is even overrated. But he can certainly power through for, tough yardage and be a factor in the run game, but it's pretty minimal in terms of the multiplier that you're going to get from the quarterback here towards the run game, unless they really want to tap into Malik Willis as some sort of a wildcat quarterback, but I don't really anticipate them taking Will Levis off the field too much. But if he goes down and you put in Malik Willis, that certainly could be an option for them. So it's been mostly good so far, but as we look at the offensive line, there's a lot of question marks here, and that's why getting Bill Callahan, the offensive line coach, to follow his son over here is such a big deal, because there's a lot of pieces here that need growth. And this is heading into the year, one of my lowest ranked offensive lines, in the bottom 5 for overall offensive line. Run blocking kind of, in that 20 to 30 range with a C grade from me. And then pass blocking being a little bit more of a concern, ranking 26 to 30th with a C- grade. But that starts at left tackle with J.C. Latham. And I don't want to be overly negative here because, for those that watched my draft content, I thought this was a reach. I thought there were other tackles that I definitely would have gone with. I had a lot of concerns about J.C. Latham to the point that I even kind of said that I predict that he'll be a bust and needs to move into guard at the next level. And then freaking Bill Callahan handpicks him as his guy. And it's like, well, what the hell do I know if this is someone that Bill Callahan believes in? So it's really a tough spot. Like, I'm telling you what I saw on film, and that is a guy that has really clunky feet that I project to have a really hard time with the more polished hyper athletes at the edge rush position that are really good at setting up inside counters, things like spins and swipes and swims. I think Latham, kind of overcompensates for his slow foot speed by having these explosive sets. He can get that depth and that range to not lose around the edge, but when he's taking his massive size and exploding into these wide sets, he really struggles to change of direction and struggles with the foot speed to cut off those inside moves. And I'm sure Callahan thinks that he can correct some of that stuff, but then are you recompensating? If all of a sudden you're not exploding to get the depth so that you don't lose on inside moves, are you all of a sudden going to have the same issues that guys out of Alabama that had similar issues, Jedrick Wills, Evan Neal, Alex Leatherwood, are you all of a sudden going to be getting burnt around the edge by speed rushers? So, look, we'll see what Callahan can do with him. But I have my concerns in terms of pass protection with Latham. It's not all bad. He's incredibly strong. You're not going to go through him. That's a plus. He's got great length. And as a run blocker, he's solid, very technically sound, and kind of gets his hands inside, runs his feet. But even as a run blocker, that was where I really even soured on Latham further, in that, I got through these. I was watching all these guys, right, get through Amarius Mims. He's killing dudes. Fuanga, killing dudes. Fatanu loves to hit people. And then I get to JC Latham, and it's like, there's a little bit of that looks like Tarzan, plays like Jane stuff going on with his run blocking, where it's like, you should be so much more of a dominant run blocker than you are. So to me, I was not a fan of the pick. I don't need to belabor that point. I'm so open to the idea that I could be dead wrong on this because Callahan has hand selected him and he's forgotten more about offensive line play than I ever will. But from what I watched and my analysis of this player coming out, I would be lying if I said I didn't have concerns. So that's a good starting point for this conversation. You get to left guard, and this should, in theory, be, by the end of the year, your best piece. Peter Skoronski, I think he's still proving kind of what his upside could be. Was a left tackle at Northwestern, viewed as a super high floor offensive line prospect, and I think he was that, where he came in for a brutal offensive line last year, not with Bill Callahan as his offensive line coach, battled through some injuries and was still a very solid guard that had some inconsistent moments. I think some of the play strength stuff in terms of both moving guys in the run game and handling power, there were flashes of it just being kind of like above average play strength, but times where he could get outmatched by some of the higher end NFL dudes in that department. But in pass protection, like some of the blitz pickup and I guess rookie learning moments were even still there for Peter Skoronski, as polished as he was coming out. But there's still room for him to beef up in the weight room, continue to develop, obviously take to great coaching, have better players around him, which will help in terms of creating push on double teams and stuff. And all the potential in the world for him to be that sort of kind of Pro Bowl caliber guard. I have no concerns about Peter Skoronski. The arrow's pointing up on him. It's just more of a matter of like, how quickly is that going to come, or are we 2 years from him being a Pro Bowl caliber guy? They signed Lloyd Cushenberry. That's great. I've just been blown away by his development. Every single year he continues to check new boxes. And, if you want a reason to believe in JC Latham, just look at what I said about Lloyd Cushenberry coming out. Like, I was so dead wrong over the course of time on Lloyd Cushenberry. I had like a 6th-round grade on him. Didn't think he would turn into a starter for Denver. They spent a 3rd-round pick on him. And to be fair, coming out the gate, he did really struggle. But the development's been incredible. Year 1 to year 2, the pass blocking came along. And then the pass blocking continued to get more efficient. And now he's turned into a pretty damn good run blocker as well, where he's, shown a really high-level understanding of the run game and, working on those combo blocks and who to block and all that stuff. So it's just been an incredible development for him, a very safe signing because of that yearly growth. He's just a smart, hardworking center with a ton of experience running a bunch of different systems at this point that it's hard to picture him not being worth the money that they paid him. So for now, he's your best piece. And then at right guard, Daniel Brunskill is kind of a Band-Aid right guard. He's about as low end of a starting caliber player as it goes. He's kind of that, if he can be your true weakest link, you're okay with it. In this case, he's maybe their third best player right now, and that's not ideal. He's just not overly consistent because of his lack of play strength. But for now, they can keep him in there and worry about some of these other more question mark pieces, which unfortunately, your right tackle is another question mark piece in presumably Dylan Radins, although depending who you ask, it might be Nicolas Petit-Frere. This will be interesting. I think Radins certainly showed last year that he's better right now than Nicolas Petit-Frere. Radins was a second-round pick that was, liked by many, that just really struggled out the gate. And he was a big play strength concern guy. That's shown up as an issue. Then they messed around with sliding him into guard. And it reminds me a little bit about what we've seen with guys like Luke Gedeke and Zach Tom, where it's like play strength concerns don't by default mean that you need to slide into guard. In fact, that can at times amplify your issues. So they kick him back out to tackle. And in year 3 last year, struggled early, but actually kind of settled in and had a pretty strong second half. Really tough to know necessarily what you're getting in Dylan Radins. I think the range of possibilities on him isn't the week 1 starter because they want to go with the higher upside Nicolas Petit-Frere, who doesn't have the same play strength concerns. That's a low end range of outcomes. I think a high end range of outcomes is he's continued to bulk up. He's won this job, and he's like a quality starting right tackle, which is what they were hoping to get when they took him in the second round. Contract year for him heading into year 4. Just a definition of a true wild card. And I struggled with whether or not to put the up arrow on him, as I did with Skoronski and even Latham. It's just, he's been so all over the map that it's hard to kind of know what you're going to get from him. And then if it is Nicolas Petit-Frere at right tackle, I think that's a huge concern because you're not showing the faith in Radins, who I think is a better player. I know you have Callahan, who can do some great work with these guys, but good Lord, Nicolas Petit-Frere has been a disaster. Every time I watch him, I'm just waiting to see growth. I'm waiting to see a guy that understands the position. And this was the thing at Ohio State, too, because he's got all the traits, right? He's an athlete. He's got the size. He's got the length, everything you look for. But he's just so discoordinated from his hands to his feet, his technique, clear lacks of development there, which to me says, like, I don't know how much Callahan's going to be able to get to this guy because it's not like he's gotten no coaching at Ohio State and in the NFL. Like, his technique should at least be somewhere brought along. And then in the run game, too, like, he's constantly whiffing and dipping his head, getting over his skis, letting guys cross his face, missing assignments. It's been a really tough road for him. And I wouldn't be optimistic if he's the starting right tackle. So that will be a competition. And then the tackle depth is really tough. Jalen Duncan, take everything we just said about Nicolas Petit-Frere's issues and amplify that. An athletic dude out of Michigan, had to play as a rookie kind of earlier than they would have hoped last year. And, he's a year away from being a year away, that type of deal. John Ojukwu also had to play with all the injuries and moving pieces last year. He at least graded out well as a run blocker when he played. Full disclosure, he wasn't playing in the games of all 22 that I watched, so I can't speak too highly on him, even though he played, I think, 4 games and potentially showed some flashes. So that's a player that, maybe if Titans fans are interested in him in that right tackle competition, I would hear you out, I suppose. But needless to say, it's just a massive question mark at tackle. And then the depth is really rough. You feel pretty solid about your interior starters, but there's not really anybody that you're super stoked about kind of eventually overtaking Daniel Brunskill at right guard. Andrew Rupchich did get some starts last year and held up okay, so maybe as a swing interior piece, as a backup, that's okay. They signed Sadiq Charles probably to be their developmental guy to kind of work with Callahan here. He's been a tough watch in Washington. You got Latavius Simmons, who was drafted by the Bears 3 years ago, has barely played, and then a couple of undrafted rookies there. So, the O-line depth is really pretty poor, and I think maybe 4 or 5 offensive lines a year get through the year without having to go to their backups, and probability would say some of these guys are going to come in as they had to last year, and you could have some issues there. So the lack of depth is an issue, and then you put the question marks at tackle on top of that, a pretty low baseline at right guard, and they just have a lot of work to do. But you're obviously can be somewhat optimistic that the coaching is going to be a dramatic improvement that shines through as the year goes on here. But as we recap the offense, that O-line question mark paired with the new coaching and, of course, really big quarterback questions at the end of the day, it shouldn't be too big of a surprise that this Titans offense that was a tough watch last year, even with the improvements, it shouldn't be too big of a surprise that these guys don't rank too high. I've got them 28th overall for offense, 28th in the passing game, 24th in the run game, where I think they'll be a little bit better. But it should be pretty self-explanatory. This series, we're ranking these teams very close to their floor, not giving any one team too much benefit of the doubt with unproven areas. And, the hope and expectation is fair to say that this should at least end around the 20th ranked offense if things can go well for this team. And hell, maybe even more than that, just depending how exciting Will Levis is. This is effectively his rookie season in a lot of ways that you want to look at it. So that's the primary objective here is growth for Will Levis and then in turn growth for the offense overall. But let's talk about the defense. Some familiar faces, some new faces here. Starting with the defensive line, mostly the same group here, and it was a solid pass rush last year. I don't expect a ton of change there. Their big problem is that teams can double Jeffrey Simmons, and Arden Key and Harold Landry are good players, but ideally should be number 3s, not number 2s. And that's why this is ultimately a C+ pass rush, because as good as Jeffrey Simmons is, his production has actually been, I don't want to say, it's just been good. It hasn't been like elite production because he's doubled as much as anybody in the league. Now, if you leave him one-on-one, he'll freaking kill you. A ton of power, just a massive frame filled out, like just play strength from his feet to his hands, to his quads, to his abs, to his biceps. Just really good at just handling contact and staying balanced throughout his rush. Maybe not quite as refined as a Chris Jones or a Quinnen Williams, but again, if you leave him one-on-one, he'll kill you, but unfortunately, he's not left one-on-one very often, and it's not too hard to slide towards an interior defensive lineman, and that's why at times, Tennessee will just put him off the edge and be like, fine, you're going to double-team him all game, we'll just put him on a tackle and hopefully get a one-on-one. But that's obviously, he's not an edge rusher, he's an interior player, but it's great to have his presence. You just kind of wish one of these other guys was a little more exciting. Where do you want to start with Harold Landry or Arden Key? Landry ends up being the more productive player. He's the guy that they kind of do a lot of chemistry ball with him and Jeffrey Simmons with a lot of the twists and stunts and gaming. And I anticipate that's not going to go anywhere with, this sort of Mike Macdonald system taking over here. And it is worth noting that Macdonald did a really good job scheming up the pass rush in a way that you had to single team a guy like Justin Madubuike. So maybe this could be the year with a different kind of organization up front that Simmons can have that, elite 80 pressure, 15 sack season that he's more than capable of. The production just hasn't come in that way. But anyway, back to Harold Landry. I fully expect the loops and the stunts and the kind of schemed up pressure and schemed up sacks that have been there under Mike Vrabel's defense. I fully expect that role is going to translate nicely in this kind of blitz-oriented front. In terms of winning one-on-ones, not a lot of power. He's a speed rusher with a ton of bend, but he doesn't have elite speed to threaten that corner. This isn't Chop Robinson or Hassan Reddick. He's a guy with 4.64 speed, so in terms of threatening that angle and getting around the bend, he's very good at it, but he's not elite at it. Again, a useful piece, but someone you can, for the most part, leave one-on-one. But then Arden Key, who doesn't quite have the overall presence in terms of the final pressure and sack numbers, but he's arguably just better at winning one-on-one reps. He's got a little bit more power to kind of play through that contact or to just generate a bull rush. But you see a lot more like kind of swipe wins with him. His one-on-one win rate is better than Harold Landry. So he's a useful guy. But again, yeah, he's better than a guy like Landry at winning one-on-one reps, but not going to just dominate you if you don't chip him or whatever. He's someone you can fairly easily account for relative to most number 2 edge rushers in the league. And then beyond that, there's really nobody you're leaning on. You know, you draft T'Vondre Sweat. I am curious to see what sort of role, and we're just starting this as a pass rush conversation. We'll kind of circle back for run defense. But from a pass rush perspective, I'm very curious to see kind of how he translates. He was better than you would expect for such a big guy as a pass rusher. And while he's not going to be going up against Big 12 centers every week where he can just bend you backwards, he still has some swims and can beat you with power. He was drafted off of the premise that he can prove to be a sort of 3-down nose tackle, which has a ton of value. And, you know, if he opens up the opportunity for Jeffrey Simmons to get one-on-ones because he is just so big and such a problem if you leave him one-on-one, then even if Sweat's not producing, you know, if you see a skyrocket in Simmons production, that could make a lot of sense, right? So I was, you know, a lot of people were really harsh on this draft pick. Honestly, if not for the DUI 3 weeks before the draft, I would love this fit. And that's, you know, I had him as a top 40 player in the draft. I'm on the record saying as that potential 3-down nose tackle, I thought his tape was actually better than Jordan Davis, who went in the top 15 picks in the draft. Granted, he's 2 years older. Davis is now entering this, like, Davis is the same age as T'Vondre Sweat, if that makes sense. But the production and the tape was better really in both phases for T'Vondre Sweat. But there's a lot of risk here. There's obvious off-field issues. You're taking a guy that has now a charted history of partying issues, taking care of his body, managing his weight, all that stuff. You're putting him in Nashville, Tennessee. That is bold. I'll leave it at that. And then the other question is, like, at his weight, how many snaps can he play? Can he stay durable? He is well beyond the typical threshold of what you want from these true nose tackle types. So he was a risky as hell pick, and this Titans team has not exactly had the best track record of making risky picks. But if he hits, it could really amplify this group. And I think the point I made about him potentially demanding double teams strictly off of his size, if he can just prove to be a good enough bull rusher in that sense, if that can open up one-on-ones for Jeffrey Simmons, that force multiplying effect could be a true game changer for this defense. But until that is proven to be a real thing here, it's hard to account for that with how we're ranking these teams. They did sign Sebastian Joseph Day, who's a, you know, kind of the ideal number 3 defensive tackle. He'll get his snaps for sure, especially if they want to come out in a base 3-4 or kind of a 5-1 front or anything like that. They can put all 5 of these guys out there at once. And then you're getting into your true depth pieces. And off the edge, their edge depth is kind of laughable. I mean, Rashad Weaver's a fine kind of 4th piece to have. I think Weaver has struggled a little bit with the 3-4 transition. I'd be curious if they would be willing to have him put 5 or 10 pounds back on and put his hand in the dirt again like he did at Pittsburgh, because he's not really a great athlete. He's more of a tough, in-your-face type of dude. I liked him coming out, but it's been a kind of a weird fit. And he's made it work as like a decent rotational player, but hasn't really proved to be special in either phase. They draft Jalen Harrell in the 7th round, kind of hardworking hybrid edge type. We'll see how much he plays. He might have to play here. And then Caleb Murphy is a guy to keep an eye on here. He had an unbelievable career at Ferris State, but it was Ferris State. Didn't really get on the field as a rookie last year, but made the team as an undrafted walk-on, if you will. There is a world where he's, you know, a adequate piece in this rotation, someone to keep an eye on if they don't end up signing someone else here. And then Thomas Rush as well. I mean, he's probably not an NFL caliber, 53-man kind of guy. A lot of opportunities, though, for one of these guys to potentially step up. But definitely a part of this roster that you look at and you look at their offseason and it's like, yeah, they weren't going to be able to fix everything on this roster overnight. And then I actually am at least curious by their interior depth. Not that any of these guys would ever really be a starter, but, all guys that I think can be adequate rotational backups. Marlon Davidson is more of a 3-tech or a 4-eye, kind of a hybrid end, a highly drafted guy that was raw coming out. Keandre Coburn and Quinton Bohanna are more nose tackle types that have been drafted in recent years. Backups to Tavondre Sweat and guys you can put in there for 5 to 8 snaps a game, I think are actually okay as far as D-line depth goes. Now, that whole conversation was very pass rush forward. Let's talk a little bit of D-line run defense here. It's a very good group. I mean, Jeffrey Simmons is just a problem because he can line up anywhere from a 5-tech to the nose tackle and be pretty much dominant. If you don't double team him, he will kill you. And now you're putting Tavondre Sweat potentially in the mix there where, look, man, you had the off-field issues and all that stuff, but his projection as a day one starter as a nose tackle is very safe. He plays with good pad level. He can split double teams. I mean, he's a damn good prospect. He really is if he can keep things straight. So it's just a huge wild card, but that is where I think he would have a pretty big impact because you're going to let Jeffrey Simmons loose a little bit more there too. They did add Sebastian Joseph Day. That's some much needed depth and floor as a partial starter that they didn't have last year. They let Tyler Tart go, and then they were counting on guys like, Kyle Pecco. And then I kind of mentioned like the interior depth is actually not bad. I don't mind Coburn and Bohanna and even Marlon Davidson as a 4-eye for, playing 5 to 10 snaps a game as a part of a rotation. And then both Landry and Key are just adequate run defenders. They have light feet and can kind of do enough to set the edge and slip blocks. Not major contributors, but haven't shown to be problems for them. Along with Rashad Weaver when he's in there is a decent third. So they do come in ranking a little bit higher in terms of run defense. And just a quick note on that for those that are really following the series, the scale for run defense is a little different than for pass rush. You might look at the grades I have on these players and be like, how is that a B for run defense, but a C+ for pass rush? It's all relative to the rest of the league, right? Like, there's a good group for run defense relative to the rest of the league where a lot of D-lines struggle there. The pass rush here relative to the rest of the league is not quite as good. But overall, it comes in as my 19th ranked defensive line. It's not a bad group. You're really hoping Sweat can be that impact. And then down the road, you would love to get a more legitimate kind of 1B type of edge piece. Maybe a priority for them next offseason. They're just going to have to make do with Key and Landry for the year. Then we get the linebacker room. This is the worst group on the roster. There's just not much to say here, man. They lost Al-Shaair. This room has become depleted over the years. Also losing David Long in recent years. Cunningham, Jayon Brown, like they've just kind of churned this room in and out every year. Jack Gibbons was the guy that stepped up last year, undrafted talent out of Minnesota. Really just kind of a classic smart guy at linebacker with good size. He showed to be a good run defender. Had a valiant job did a valiant job to win that job last year and didn't really look back. I don't really have any concerns about him in terms of run defense other than the sideline to sideline speed shows up as an issue. You can see, sometimes on those wide zones or on power or sweeps, guards have an easier time getting across his face, and then you're losing that gap against the run. But between the tackles, he's very solid, very good with his run keys, good tackler, all that. Coverage, he'll look around. He's smart, but just very limited in terms of movement. And then they signed Kenneth Murray, basically a 1-year prove-it deal with a team option for year 2, very much living off of his physical tools and the first-round pedigree. Kind of the classic example of like why players want to get drafted in the first round so bad, because if you bust, you're going to keep getting opportunities like this. He's been rough, man. And what's surprising is how rough he's been in every phase. You would think with his traits, he's got great speed, he's got great size, and he's got the effort, and he's been praised for his leadership and all that stuff. It's just been a surprise that he's been so bad, but really in both phases, has no idea what he's looking at in coverage, is constantly out of position. He allowed the 6th most yards in coverage last year per PFF, and that's been all over his career. The lack of ball production as well, just got his hand on, one pass breakup, one interception, just, that's been him throughout his career. And then the run defense, he's so late for his keys. He's constantly, blowing his gaps. One play is over aggressive, one play is under aggressive. It just, the mental side of the position has not come for him, unfortunately. Does that change here? I don't know. I would bet against that, but he sure as hell has motivation based on the structure of that contract to get to the second year. Because you look at it on paper, it's a 2-year, $15 million contract, but 2/3 of that is basically non-guaranteed and on the second year of the deal. So he's got to play well if he wants the majority of that money. But I don't mind the signing for the Titans when this room's going to be a weakness, to, kind of give him that incentive to step up and earn it. But I like drafting Cedric Gray in the 4th round probably even more. I think, Cedric Gray versus Kenneth Murray, you put them both out there, you going to be able to tell much of a difference? Probably not. I mean, I think Cedric Gray is a really smart player. He has a good zone feel, good size, good run defender. He was one of the rare linebackers that had the size, had solid physical traits, but was actually asked to do NFL linebacker things in college. A lot of these linebackers, it's like, yeah, you're blitzing, you're playing a short zone, you're playing man-to-man, you're just doing very little, you're just playing run and chase in terms of run defense. They actually asked Cedric Gray to do a lot of the true 3-down stuff that NFL linebackers are asked to. So I thought it was a really good pick. And I don't think it's out of the question that if he looks good, that he could start really over either of these guys. I think if Murray's continues to look as bad as he has in the first 4 years of his career, you can bench him, or, if Cedric Gray just earns this over Jack Gibbons, that could happen too. So definitely someone to keep an eye on as a potential upgrade down the road for this group. But as we know, these linebackers typically take time. Case in point, Kenneth Murray. Then you got Otis Reese, kind of that dime linebacker type. He actually played a little bit last year and showed some flashes. Luke Gifford, journeyman veteran. James Williams is also a fascinating player. Was a decently productive safety at Miami, but converting to linebacker here was not a surprise. He put on weight for the pre-draft process to make that transition. He actually showed good coverage stuff as a safety, so that shouldn't so much be a question mark, but the run defense is kind of a non-starter right now. He's a true project. And then you have a variety of different names, guys like Chance Campbell, JoJo Doman, Garrett Wallow, all trying to sneak onto this roster, but probably a couple practice squatters there. But it is really one of the worst linebacking groups in the league. They rank 31st overall, dead last for coverage at the position, and then 26th to 29th with a C grade in terms of a linebacker run defense. But much better when you get to the secondary. Though there are some question marks here, it's a very strong group. They address this heavily, obviously. Going to get L'Jarius Sneed from the Chiefs, and then signing Chidobe Awuzie from Cincinnati. And, I mean, just so much to love about going to get L'Jarius Sneed. He was effectively a free agent. You had to trade and sign him. But he was really only available because the Chiefs couldn't afford him. They wanted to keep him, but just couldn't make it work. And those are the types of guys you want to go after, right? And at the cornerback position, you want to go after 6 foot, ultra fast, physical, smart players that have, multiple Super Bowl rings, have been a big part of playoff defenses, and a track record of production. Like, the dude's a number 1 corner. He proved it last year. He earned every cent of his contract to be one of the highest paid corners in the league. Just a massive upgrade. He can even provide inside-out flexibility if you want, though McCreary has kind of settled in the slot, but he's awesome. But then you have Chidobe Awuzie, who Well, he was available for a reason. He was coming off the injury in 2022 and looked like a regressing older corner coming off an injury. It's not that he's horrible, but he had some pretty ugly losses, some pretty ugly games. And I think in terms of that long speed, it's something you got to protect on him a little bit more. And I just don't think you're getting the Chidobe Awuzie that the Bengals kind of stole in free agency, and he looked like a kind of low-end number one corner for a couple years there. I don't think you're getting that guy, but can you get an adequate number two or even a number three in this room if you view McCreary as your number two for what was essentially a 2-year, $20 million contract? The third year was all fluff money. He's 29 years old. I think he's got a couple of solid years in him. He's got to stay healthy, though. And that's a question mark. So he's probably, honestly, the biggest question mark in this secondary in terms of what could the floor be if he's hurt. But the ceiling is, solid number two corner in more of a zone-heavy system that, might get picked on a couple weeks, but can make some plays and hold up okay. So a decent enough signing. And then Roger McCreary, I think you could say the arrow is pointing up on him. I know when people get annoyed when you try to confirm your draft priors and all that stuff, but McCreary, it's like, okay, he's 5'11", he's not that fast, but he's super technically sound, he's tough, he can play inside, he can play outside. Coming out was feels like he's going to be a really solid corner within the first couple of years of his rookie deal, and probably never going to be too much more than that. I think that's pretty fair analysis on him. He is really scrappy man-to-man. I think the zone instincts, the zone feel has developed in the NFL. That certainly helped his consistency because he just didn't run a lot of zone at Auburn. That was going to take a little bit, but I think it's there now. Tackling the run defense from the slot's very good. I don't look at him and be like, oh my God, he's going to ascend to be this $16 million a year corner. But I think as a 2 or a 3, he's a very good piece and certainly not a weakness for you. And then your safety duo is a very high floor group, just maybe not the most dynamic playmaking or consistent coverage unit, but just very solid. I mean, both these guys are so similar. You can almost lump them into the same type here. The Titans very clearly, you can almost lump them into the same conversation here. The Titans very clearly have a type. They want a converted slot corner that can really do a little bit of everything. Both these guys are very Geno Stone-esque in terms of what Denard Wilson had as one of his safeties last year, in that, these guys aren't the biggest guys to be dominant box defenders. They're not the fastest guys in terms of range from single high. Not the twitchiest, quickest man-to-man or zone match guys, but aren't going to blow assignments, not going to be out of position too much, not going to blow a lot of tackles or, gaff on their run responsibilities. Just responsible, solid safety duo on the back end. And I'm not really going to overhype either Hooker or Molden, but I think they can get through this year and years moving forward without really having to worry about these guys on the back end. Now, the depth here is a massive concern, and that is compiled by injury questions on Chidobe Awuzie. And even if you want to be a little bit negative, there were some medical questions on L'Jarius Sneed, which is why the Colts passed on trading for him and why it was only a third-round pick as opposed to a second-round pick, probably. Don't want to speak that into existence, but I think it's worth at least noting that there might be some longevity concerns on Sneed. But this depth is just not very good, especially in the safety room, but these corners are all pretty unproven. I mean, Trey Avery has played, but has been very up and down. Caleb Farley is a complete afterthought at this point. I mean, he hasn't been able to stay healthy. That was the question on him coming out. I don't know if he's even going to make this team at this point because of the health. But what's frustrating with Farley is you would think he'd be a guy that even, at least when he plays, he's good. That hasn't been the case. He's been burnt toast when he's played. Still some theoretical upside, but that seems long gone at this point. I do like the Jarvis Brownlee pick in the 5th round. Super tough, instinctive guy, great zone eyes, can, run routes for receivers, anticipate stuff, and good ball skills. He fits the mold, and he would definitely be the guy, if Awuzie went down, that I'd be interested to see what he could look like out there, especially in this system that does a lot of that zone and keeping, these guys' eyes on the quarterback. So he was a good pick and a really fun fit here. Eric Garrar had to play in the slot a lot last year. He's a tough dude, good special teamer to have. And then Tay Gowan is another kind of, traits-based developmental type of project. And then with the safety group, I almost think Eric Garrar might make this team as more of a safety this year with, it's obviously a new regime, but at least, this team has a history of converting slot corners to safety. He seems to fit what Hooker and Molden are. So maybe you plug him in as safety depth, but, Mike Brown, Shaheem Carter have barely played. Matthew Jackson, Keaton Ellis have not. It's, there's very little to speak of in terms of safety depth. So Molden and Hooker got to stay healthy. And I do think you're probably, another major weakness would be kind of that, who's your dime back? Because you're either keeping both linebackers on the field, which is obviously a problem. We rank this team last in linebacker coverage. So you're either leaning on one of those guys from base nickel, or, who are you putting out there? Is it Eric Garrar or Trey Avery? Like, someone's going to be on the field for important downs here that is not ideal. So I love the starting 5 if healthy, but this probably goes from a B+ coverage unit down to a B because of some of the depth and durability concerns. But overall, I think it's a solid defense. With the exception of the linebackers, there's not a huge hole. And linebacker is kind of the running back of the defense. But if it is a problem as the way it might be here, that can drag you down as we're seeing here. But they rank 26th for overall defense. And there's some room to go up there, specifically with like Tavondre Sweat and, how good of a coordinator is Denard Wilson going to be. Those are the two things that could show up and kind of lift this up to be more of a top 20 defense. But, some of these units have a large range of outcomes, like maybe the Titans offense might have. Whereas this defense, I do see the holes, and I don't really expect this to be a great defense or really anything close to what it's been in the Mike Vrabel era. I think you're going to see a lot more questions on that side of the ball than we've had in years past with this Titans team, but hopefully the difference in the offense can compensate for that, right? We are going to talk about the special teams here before we wrap everything up. And with our newly crafted special teams formula here for the series, the Titans stopped the run of these guys ranking in order of their power rankings. Commanders, Patriots, and Panthers have all come in that order. The Titans are all the way up there at 19th for special teams. Nick Folk actually had a monster season last year after the Patriots let him go. We don't know if he'll repeat that or not. We use a 2-year moving average for the kickers, so Nick Folk is going to come down from, I think he had like an 84 grade or something last year, so if he can repeat that, they'll shatter that kicker grade. And then Ryan Stonehouse as well, very good punter, trending in the right direction as well. Was a rookie a couple years ago. You are changing coordinators, some shakeup with the depth, and you're going to have some questions in terms of the coverage unit and the coaching and all that stuff, but it should be a pretty solid special teams that you're not expecting a ton of gaffes that cost this team games. The biggest question would probably be like, can Nick Folk repeat that outlier season from last year? But let's tie a ribbon on all of this. Again, they rank 28th for offense, 27th for defense, kind of right down the fairway there. And as we just broke down, 19th for special teams. But, I think they've done a good job to weed out some of the holes that this team had last year. I love the overall direction of the organization, but, really only 3 things matter for this team this year. Will Levis, what does he show you? Can he be a franchise quarterback for you? Number 2, can the offensive line get elevated? Can Bill Callahan do the job that we think he might be able to be able to do? And then number 3 is just the overall coaching too. Like, Callahan and Wilson haven't done this before. These are new roles for them. Head coach and defensive coordinator. How good can they be and carry forward as the leaders of this organization? So it's a transition season. Expectations should be pretty low. To kind of recap the overall strengths and weaknesses with this team, I think the practices will be fun between these wide receivers and these corners as long as the corners are healthy. I think those are the 2 biggest strengths of this team, is the wide receiver trio and the cornerback trio. Hopefully that competition can breed excellence there. But the rest of the team is really either unproven or a legitimate question. We don't need to go back through that. It's listed there in the graphic there. But let's look at the schedule, what this ultimately might look like here. So their over-under is actually 6.5 wins. And when I look at their schedule, I actually think that's high, to the point that I think I would bet the under here, even in a world where Will Levis looks pretty good. I just think the AFC is super tough. Their division is really shaping up this year. And they have to play the NFC North, which looks like it might be the deepest and best division in the NFC. So that sucks. They have the AFC East, and then their fourth place schedule drew them the Chargers, who I would say are unlikely to be the fourth worst team in the AFC West. And it drew them Cincinnati, who are obviously better than what their record was last year with Joe Burrow going down. They do get Washington, which should be, pretty split, but that's their easiest game, and it's on the road. So I'm not a fan of this schedule. I just don't see this team getting to 7 wins. That just feels rich in the AFC this year. I could see a world, though, where they go 6-11, but are the 19th best offense in the league, and you feel pretty good about kind of the direction that this team is going. Expectations should be really low on this team, and I actually think there's some money to be made betting the under there. So I'll probably be taking that myself. Obviously not betting them to win the division or the Super Bowl there either. But Titans fans, you guys will have to let me know if that's a fair outlook for this team. Are there any crazy people out there that think this team is going to go on a run with Will Levis? Just let me know. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't hit that like button yet, if you please could on the way out. It takes just a second. It really helps. And let me know in the comments as well who you think is coming next for team number 28. Appreciate you for watching, and we'll see you then. Peace out.